Thanks for tuning into my new show, Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. I'm Steve Raye, author of the book, How to Get U.S. Market Ready. And in my previous podcast, I shared some of the lessons I've learned from 30 years in the wine and spirits business, helping brands enter and grow in the U.S. market. This series will be dedicated to the personalities who have been working in the Italian wine sector in the U.S., their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. I'll uncover the roads that they walked, shedding light on current trends, business strategies, and their unique brands.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Vivino, the world's largest online wine marketplace. The Vivino app makes it easy to choose wine. Enjoy expert team support, door-to-door delivery, and honest wine reviews to help you choose the perfect wine for every occasion. Vivino. Download the app on Apple or Android and discover an easier way to choose wine.
Hi, this is Steve Raye, and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. I'm very pleased this week to have as a guest Erica Deucy, who is the Chief Content Officer at Pix Wine. Welcome to the show, Erica. I look forward to our talk.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here with you. You know, I always love to chat with you, so excited for our conversation.
Well, in this case, you're going to be doing most of the talking instead of me, so that will be the difference. Well, give us a little bit of background of you professionally and how you got to where you are. I mean, we met when you were a couple of steps not backward, but earlier on your journey, and you've made some big leaps since. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I really come from a background of big publishing. So I worked for a lot of big publishing companies. I ran the travel brand Photos at Random House way back. I ran the digital for Saveur, which was a food and wine and travel publication. Ran digital at Condé Nast for Architectural Digest. And so a lot of my earlier career, even at the digital director level, was really about helping brands learn how to grow their audiences and create content for what at that time was more of an emerging digital audience. So I, worked with a lot of big brands and then got to a certain point in my career where I had, as a side passion, gone through all the sommelier certifications through WSET and had written a cocktail book. And I said, I think I am at the point where I want to step away from big publishing, and I want to go back to my earlier roots, which had been in startups. So I did start out at a music startup right at the turn of the century, the big Y2K.com sort of boom and bust cycle. That's where I started out my career. And so I decided to really go down the road of wine as a topic and approached a company that I had known a lot of people were using called 750. 750, this was a platform for people in the wine and spirits industry in the US to do a variety of things. And I saw for them an opportunity to start a trade publication. And this wouldn't be any sort of just regular trade publication, but one that really felt relevant to the people who were actually working in the trade, not for the C-suite. So for people who were working at retail, somms on the floor, importers who were knocking on doors, that type of audience was who I was interested in engaging with. And so I pitched the concept of the publication that would become the 750 Daily and went on to work with 750 for several years, founding and raising up that publication to the point where it won, many, many awards, editorial awards and industry awards. After that, I went over to VinePair, and VinePair is the publication in the US with the biggest number of drinks readers every month. At the time, had about 5 million users every month, and worked with them for a period where I helped them create also a trade vertical and expand their journalism in some interesting ways. So that was, the next phase of my career, and that led us to this latest phase, which is at Pix. And Pix is a wine discovery platform. Now, it's behind a closed beta right now, so a lot of people in the industry, may just be hearing about it, and consumers also are just hearing about it. But it's a really interesting type of platform because it takes pieces of different platforms that are out there and kind of combines them in a new way. So one of the pieces of Pix is utility, and this is really creating a hub for wine content on the web. So for example, if you were to come into Pix and search for some wine, there will be different ways to engage with the content. You could go directly to product detail page and find all the offers that are related to it, or you could find related collections. So essentially on this utility piece of Pix, what we're looking to do is, you can think about it like Netflix or Audible. Those platforms do a really good job of taking a vast universe and making it small. So think about your Netflix feed that you see pop up on your screen. There's, the top picks for Steve. There's the top picks in the US right now. There maybe you like, horror movies. There's the top trending horror movies. So it's taking these types of rubrics and applying them to wine, which hasn't been done in a really effective way before. And the way that we do it a little bit differently is that we don't just have an algorithm or a machine trying to do this. We have a team of real people, wine experts, who are led by a master of wine, David Round, based in the UK. And they really are working to create a digestible way to find and buy wine in the US. Later, we'll expand, but starting out in the US. So that's one pillar of Pix. Another is content. Content, as we've just laid out, is really my baby. And so I started the publication, The Drop, that launched in June. And working with me on that is a renowned wine editor who's based in Germany named Felicity Carter. We also have a staff editor, a staff writer in New York named Janice Williams, and various other people working with us, as well as a roster of really fantastic writers. So we're publishing many times a week. We're publishing all types of stories, and we're looking for ways to get people engaged and interested in wine in new ways. So we're not just doing kind of the top, roundups of these are the bottles to buy, but we're looking at, can we get people excited about wines in ways that are kind of unconventional. So actually one of our top performing articles right now is wine horoscopes. That sounds a little crazy, but we actually are laying out each month all of the different horoscopes, and we have a well-known wine writer, Alice Firing, matching the horoscopes to the wine. That's super fun.
Really? I didn't know that. I know Alice. It didn't sound like something she would do, but it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, that's really fun. And then, we are looking at pop culture. What are the wines that they're drinking on Succession? What are the wines to drink with all of the, television premieres that are coming up in November? So these kind of different ways of thinking about wine that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you go to the site, which is pix.wine, you'll find our content there, and then you'll be able to kind of get a sense of all the different things we're doing. But that's the second pillar of Pix. And then the third pillar is really what we think of as access. And what we mean by that is not a snooty, exclusive type of access, but what we're talking about is experiences and early access to flash sales or discount codes, things that we will be able to provide the users and subscribers of Pix. Will be able to provide them with these additional benefits that those three things together, utility, content, and access, brings a new type of platform to the consumer wine buying space that we hope will be really compelling.
Wow. Okay. So you're heading up the content portion, the balance of content versus commercial sales. Obviously, commercial sales is one of the revenue models. And content is there's a lot of argument in the industry about, the death of publishing in general and the future of journalism and the role of journalism, bias of certain publications, certainly in the general news category, but also even in the wine category. Where do you guys fit on the continuum of super wine geeky only for academics all the way to some very, very simple, here's the 5 different kinds of wine that you need to know about?
Sure. Well, first I'll make a correction. So we don't actually sell wine on Pix. So on Pix, what we're doing is bringing all of the offers that are available to someone onto one platform. So for example, if you were to go on Google right now and search a certain bottle of wine, you may go onto a website of a store and get all the way down the funnel and not know that they're unable to ship to you in your certain zip code. Maybe it's, you're in a certain state or what have you that you're not able to ship to. So what we're doing is making all of the offers, that we're surfacing them. And then we also are going to be sourcing the different ways that you could receive them. So for example, we'll list what is the fastest delivery? What is the delivery on a refrigerated truck at some point? We should be able to do that. What is the delivery that is free, right? So all of the different use cases, or here is the wine that is closest to you. Here is the wine, closest to your destination. Those use cases are all things that we're looking to solve for at some point, but we actually don't conduct the sales on our site.
So the word that comes to mind is Meta. And in spite of the fact that they just changed the name of Facebook to Meta, or at least the parent company, it's kind of an overarching thing. It's similar, I think, in some respect to like Trivago or hotels.com. Would that be a Kayak? Kayak would be the...
Yeah, and I think kayak.com for a long time was a similar platform. But your original question was about journalism. So I'll get back to that. So it's interesting that you say, is this a site for wine geeks? Because Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago called us one of the best websites for wine geeks. And so that actually is, a consumer publication calling us a publication for wine geeks, which we love, because I think that is definitely one area of content that we feel strongly about. We want to help people build knowledge, and we love debunking things that are sort of rumors or assumptions in the industry about how sulfites work, or any sort of topics like that. If we can debunk it, and if we can find the facts around a certain topic, we'll jump in and do that. And we love doing that.
Well, let me jump in right there, because that's a question I get asked a lot. You probably do too. I'm allergic to sulfites. And then you go into the explanation how, well, their sulfites are naturally produced in the fermentation process and they needed to be added at some level to preserve the entire yada, 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 yada. Well, how do you debunk that?
Well, yeah, we talk to scientists and we ask them about it. And we also, it's a multi-layered issue. There's things in wine like biogenic amines and so forth. So you can go onto the site, read the article, learn all of the different layers of information about that particular topic. But, generally I'd say the thing that we've found is that there's not a lot of publications out there that are really doing the original research of talking to scientists who have actually studied these topics, right? What they're doing is just asking a couple, people in the wine industry, well, what do you think about sulfites? What do you think about sulfites? Well, what we're doing is actually going deeper. So that's one area of our content. But another area of our content that's been really popular is our opinion pieces. So there was an opinion piece just this week from a winemaker and author in Australia, Rachel Signer, who was talking about, is it time to embrace flaws in wine? And she built the case for that. And so what we're finding is that there aren't a lot of outlets for those types of conversations. And we're providing an outlet for those discussions to happen. And we're getting into some really fantastic further discussions on Twitter and on social platforms with people who are on both sides of the issue. So those types of articles are really fun. But, those are really more the wine geeky side. We also are doing wine content for people who may be newer to wine, they want to build some knowledge, or they just want to have a fun, interesting read related to something about pop culture or to one of the celebrities that they may be familiar with. So I'd say we run the gamut from collectors and wine lovers all the way to content for people who are new to wine.
So the style of writing is very different from what you see in many wine publications, because it's not the traditional fruit cherries, smoked tobacco, fried gooseberries, those kinds of things, descriptors that nobody necessarily really tastes or believes in, but thinks that's the way it's supposed to be described and discussed, as opposed to, I love Robert Joseph's comment on, do I like it? I mean, he even has a website called doilikeit.com. And that's kind of the bottom line there. How do you take the snootiness out of wine writing and that kind of default to geekiness that people feel, not comfortably part of?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because we do work very intentionally with our writers on this topic. So when our writers are starting to use wine jargon, we really go back to them and query that and ask them to break it down into layman's terms, because, we don't need to create additional barriers to wine. One of the things that I noticed working at VinePair, which was a publication that did both spirits, beer, and wine in terms of its coverage area, is that spirits coverage really took off over the time I was there. Beer coverage, stayed about steady, but wine coverage started to go down in terms of audience. So my concern, and what I think we've seen in some of the industry stats around sales, is that wine is losing share of voice. And I think part of the problem is how we talk about wine. So how do we make wine more accessible to more people? That is something that we're working on consistently. And it comes down to everything from, the language we're using, the examples we're giving, the way we're framing, finding these different ways into wine where we're referencing music or, sports or other areas of people's lives that they feel more comfortable with, and using those as a lens through which to get into wine or think about how wine can be relevant through something they're already passionate about. That's one of the things we really try to dial in.
Cool. I had been toying on and off of writing an article about, I've been collecting some of the terms that we all use. And just as an example, one of them is minerality. It sounds real. It sounds scientific. It seems to make sense that if you have a vineyard with rock underneath it, that the taste or flavor of the rocks comes through. But if you look into the science of it, no, that's not true, because the minerals are breaking down to whatever their smallest unit is and getting absorbed with the water, but they don't maintain their integrity in the plant itself. They get combined into other molecules and so forth. So you don't taste the rock, so to speak. So when people come to me and say, here, lick this rock, this is what this wine tastes for, sometimes the metaphor works, but the science beneath it is wrong or not real. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think minerality is an interesting one, because there's so many different ways to approach that. So for example, I tend to like wines that have a salty quality to them. You could call that, a volcanic white from Sicily. You could call that a mineral driven white, or, comment on its minerality. But generally I'll just say something like, it tastes a bit salty. You can break down those terms and look for ways to make it a little bit more accessible through the language. Like, one of the things that drives me nuts in a similar way is like when people call wine linear. Like, who is going to know what a linear wine is, and what's even the opposite of that? Like, those types of terms, I think, scare people away from wine and are not really useful. And I think, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, to our writers and to ourselves, is who are we writing this for? Are we writing it for a consumer, for someone who's interested in wine and may have varying degrees of knowledge about it? Or are we writing this for ourselves or other wine writers, right? So I think we have to challenge ourselves as the wine community to try to think in consumers' terms. I mean, for the vast majority of people, they're probably, wine is a thing on their table. They, maybe they have a wine fridge and they collect some wines, but are they really, thinking about it to such a degree that we are? In my experience, that's not true. I'm the wine geek who brings 6 bottles of wine, in my special wine bag to every dinner party that I go to. And I always try to talk to people about all the wines, and they're like, and, and so, but then when I say something like, okay, So think about this wine. This wine is like sort of crazy and jagged, like, like a David Bowie song, and I like bring in these pop cultural references. That's something that resonates with people. Or you figure out what it is that they're excited about, and then you use those references. And I think that's like an angle in kind of a secret backdoor to get people excited, is engage them on a thing they know about and then use that as to something that's relevant.
It's relevant. Yeah. I think, I say we, those of us in the industry, and particularly producers, I think are our own worst enemy, working on a project and trying to audit what they looked like online. And all it was bottle after bottle after bottle after bottle with a label close up, maybe a bottle lying in a pile of grapes, or, a bottle on a dinner table, but there's no lifestyle imagery about it. And one of the things I like to say is, if we can't bring people to wherever, whether it's New Zealand or Italy, how can we bring New Zealand or Italy to them? And so this lifestyle component about the wine is much more than the wine that the wine geeks like, about, linear or sharp or acidic or whatever terms that you want to use, and much more a contributor to whatever the event is. If it's just you and your wife and you're talking about something else during dinner, then it's the conversation that's happening there. Dinner party, when nobody wants to talk about the wine, but you want to talk about the football game, the camaraderie that's going on down there. But most producers, jump right to scores, labels, varietals, regions.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is challenging. For producers, and not being a producer, I can only imagine, but I think looking probably at the US market, it must just feel like this behemoth that is impossible to engage with. And so I think the baseline of engagement is to have those bottle shots, to have the descriptions, right? But then how do you engage with an audience beyond that? If you've done those baseline things, that just means you're going to be able to supply publications or distributor sites or retailers with the right facts. But on top of that, how is it that you can help people visualize how to engage with your wine? Like, I think those lifestyle sort of scenes, is this an everyday wine? Is this a collectible wine? What types of occasions might this wine be useful for in people's lives? Is this a great gift for your grumpy wine-loving boss? Is this a great gift for, someone else in your life? So I think helping people connect the dots is something that producers can do. But, I think one thing we have to acknowledge is that it's getting harder and harder on social media for them to, produce some lifestyle shots and imagine that they're going to get much lift. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the platforms, there's more, TikTok, LinkedIn, yada, yada, all of these additional ones. But for sort of the core platforms, it's gotten harder and harder to build organic reach. And what that means is that you have to engage in a new way. I think, and what I see a lot of wine brands doing successfully, is them engaging with micro influencers. So small people who have a small wine following. It could be 1,000 people, 5,000 people. But if they have good engagement on their social media, maybe it's time to do a social giveaway with them or an Instagram chat with them and the winemaker, right? So how do you get your brand involved in some of these types of partnerships, which aren't that expensive to, activate? They're actually probably cheaper in a lot of ways than paid advertising on those platforms. So, my advice to brands looking to connect with different audiences in the United States is to team up with influencers. Don't have to be huge, can be micro influencers, and maybe do a campaign of several talks. And in each of these talks, you're reaching a different micro audience, but it can have a lot of traction and result in sales. So that type of pairing and new thinking around content production is where I see brands engaging effectively.
Yeah, two words that jump into my mind as you're talking about that is relevance and resonance. It needs to be both relevant to what they're thinking about and things that are important to them, and resonates because it gives them something new to talk about, some new knowledge that it imparts, or a new way to enjoy it. I kind of simplify it to say that the challenge, as I'm dealing with producers who are often, in the case of wines, farmers right? And are not communications experts, or experienced communications people is a better description for you and I, because I don't think we're experts at that, is to get them, meaning general consumers, to tell your story in their words to their friends. That's what influencer marketing is all about. And whether it's codified through an ad auction based site, or you're paying a fee to an influencer that is disclosed on the web, however it happens, the real point of the matter is, because we know the most important recommendation is not a score, is not a display. It's one person telling other people, oh, you should try this wine. We had it with whatever, and it was really great.
Exactly. That's so true. And I think that because it's interesting, because I would definitely agree that like the number one thing you want to aim for is that positive word of mouth from people, right? So just from someone who loved your wine and wants to talk about it on their social feeds, or wants to talk about it to their friends in real life. One thing that's like a little like interesting to the side is I think during COVID, I've actually seen the importance of these micro influencers go up, and more brands, and a lot of wine brands start to engage with these micro influencers because people aren't seeing one another in real life. So that word of mouth has like sort of faded away as we've all done this social distancing, but there's still ways to engage with those people in like the absence of that. So it's, other things to think about, I think, is there's so many wine podcasts now for consumers.
Like this one. Well, it's not a consumer one, but yes.
Right. So I think, trying to, as an individual wine producer, I think, pitching podcasts about appearing on, saying like, hey, I want to appear on your podcast as a guest. Or there's so many newsletters now, little blogs and newsletters. And I think it's interesting because you talked about the death of journalism, but I find now that blogs, podcasts, newsletters, publications are more important than ever, because we don't have restaurants, bars at the scale we once did. We don't have real life interaction in the way that we once did. So these things have taken on an increasing importance. So it's funny because like for a while I thought, okay, if I were a wine brand, would I really need to employ someone for public relations? And at the time when brands were able to build their own audiences on Facebook and Instagram, I would have said maybe not. But now that trend has reversed. The cost of participating on Facebook and Instagram has gone way up. In-person interactions have gone way down. And so what are we doing more of? Consuming more of these channels, and brands have to find a way to do it at scale. So partnering with micro-influencers, appearing on podcasts, appearing on newsletters, appearing in publications, those are all channels to get in front of the consumers that you want to reach. And so it's someone recently asked me, should my brand have a public relations person? I said, you know what? It's actually more important than ever.
Interesting. So you had mentioned death of journalism. Actually, this was before we came on air. The words I used was wither the future of journalism. And it just said, just like in terms of leveraging it for commercial purposes with PR, there's all this fragmentation of media. So there's a lot more outlets. A lot of them are personal outlets. But what about the people who are trained in journalism? Is there a future for them to get actually paid and paid what they're worth? You're one of the few publications out there that actually does pay for it. Now you're going to get inundated with calls, but pays for articles because so many people are willing to do it for free. Where's that all going?
Yeah. I mean, I think publishing in general, and this was one of the reasons that I left the big publishing world, publishing revenue models are broken. And I don't have the answer to it. I think a lot of brands, including the big ones like Condé Nast, are still trying to figure this out. But what I really see an escalation of is talent-owned publications. So what I mean is Substack, for example, and people building up their small audiences, which may be 1,000 subscribers or 10,000 subscribers or 50,000 subscribers, into paid subscriptions. So you're really seeing the trend line of that start to increase, where creators are saying, you know what, it's just not worth it to me to pitch to some of these publications for a couple $100 when I could build up my own audience. And I think that's one of the big key trends that I'm seeing, because once you own your own audience, you can interact with them how and when you want. And so let me just say that this is not only for creators, this is for wine brands. Wine brands, every single wine brand should have its own newsletter database, should be interacting with its audience on a regular basis and working to grow that audience. Because as every other platform gets more and more expensive to compete on, to advertise on, this is the one channel that you own completely. You're not responsible to whatever Google's SEO changes are or Facebook's algorithm changes or any of the other platforms. Once you own your newsletter audience, you own it forever. So growing that audience and having a value-added way to interact with them, either you're doing regular content or you're giving offers or you're doing a wine club or what have you. There's a million ways to activate on a newsletter strategy, but I would say it is absolutely essential for every brand.
Interesting that the parallel on the trade side is the differentiation I'm seeing in a lot of these direct-to-consumer or e-commerce platforms is who owns the relationship with the purchaser. So with third-party delivery sites like Drizzly, my understanding is Drizzly owns that. And in some sites like City Hive and WineFetch, which do the e-commerce, basically it's white label e-commerce, they own the data. And the retailers that I've talked to say that's a huge difference for them. And that's one of the, not few ways, but one of the most important ways to be able to compete with Total Wine, other big box stores, and other channels that seem to be eroding the retail store, that there always will be a place for a brick and mortar store, but they have to provide more value. And the way to do that is communicating with their customers.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd also say Pix falls into the category of getting out of the way of the retailer and the consumer. So we are the matchmaker. We facilitate that connection. But instead of some of the other platforms that own the data, all of our data goes to, so the click goes straight through to the retailer owns that transaction, they own that consumer, they have the relationship forever. That's one of the key differences and why Pix as a platform has been so, enthusiastically embraced by and also funded by a lot of people from the wine industry.
I normally end each interview asking, what's the big takeaway from that? But you just gave us two big takeaways in your presentation. So I'm not going to do that. But I do want to thank you for sharing the time here. It was a very stimulating conversation and some really interesting perspective on how things are changing, both on the journalism side and also on the commercial side of actually buying, selling, and talking about wine. I think we all recognize that it's all about the journey, not the destination. And these are just new ways to find out about new things. And there's always something new to find out about at wine. And then share it with somebody else. And then sharing the wine with them as well as the information. That's what makes the world go around and makes us all happy.
Yeah, it is a fascinating time to be in the wine industry and especially on the digital side. There's so much change happening right now. And I think it just behooves wine brands and retailers and really everyone in the industry to be looking around and saying, how can I get involved? How can I connect with consumers in new ways? Because even with, hopefully COVID will come to an end, but I think a lot of the purchasing behaviors, the search behaviors, the discovery behaviors that we grew during COVID are going to stay with us forever. And I think a lot of trend forecasting bears that out. I think it's going to be with us forever. So to be in this area of the industry at this very moment feels like the exact right place to be.
If people want to reach out to you, what email they should use, and also some of the social handles for you and or Pix?
So to reach out to me, people can email me at Erica, ERICA .D @pix.wine. So it's just pix.wine. And then my social handles are on Instagram and Twitter. They're both at Erica Deucy. So it's ERICA DUECY, all one word.
U before the E. I've been corrected. Thank you very much. My guest today has been Erica Deucy, a good friend in the industry with some really interesting comments from the world of content and commerce. So Erica, thank you very much for joining us. And for all of our listeners, we hope you come back next week and listen in on our next guest. So Erica, thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
This is Steve Raye. Thanks again for listening on behalf of the Italian Wine Podcast.
Hi everybody! Italian Wine Podcast celebrates its 4th anniversary this year, and we all love the great content they put out every day. Chin with Italian wine people has become a big part of our day, and the team in Verona needs to feel our love. Producing the show is not easy, folks. Herding all those hosts, getting the interviews, dropping the clubhouse recordings, not to mention editing all the material. Let's give them a tangible fan hug with a contribution to all their costs. Head to ItalianWinePodcast.com and click donate to show your love.